A word about this session. I'm going to, I mentioned some of this during the Mike Goucher session this morning, but I thought it would be helpful to give you a bit more detail about how we're getting to where we're going. So the premise in the morning was to talk about the necessary side of the equation in terms of whether or not we really have a shortage, and I think that question is put to rest, and then ask people from both the public and the private sector to give us a narrative about what a workforce shortage looks like in day-to-day life here, so that we could envision not just the severity of it, but the question of how it plays out, how it ripples through a community or how it ripples through a company or what have you. This afternoon is about giving you folks an opportunity to talk about, and our panelists to talk about, what are our priorities here? If I tell you it's a 2-year challenge, not a 10-year challenge, what's the priority in that 2 years so that we can focus? And if you're going to do that, if that's the focus, those are the 3 priorities, and you can suggest additional priorities. What did we learn this morning? What did we bring into the room this morning ourselves that will help us envision and understand how we move forward here, okay? And some stories to it. So with that as background, you'll remember that I told you the Wisconsin Department of Workforce Development has a list of the top 50 jobs in Wisconsin. The total projected openings is 62,000, okay? If you take a look at the top 15 of those, okay, that's about 60% of that 62,000, right? And then if you take a look at it by per capita, et cetera, as I told you, we asked Deloitte then to profile registered nurses, welders, and software developers, and they developed very specific profiles based on interviews with Wisconsin employers, et cetera. And then we asked them to generate assessments of public and private revenue generated by that job at the entry-level salary, okay? So here's the registered nurse, 57,396 with an associate degree. The blue, the light blue is direct value, et cetera. And you can see it there for the advanced welder and for the network engineer. All of this stuff, if you haven't seen it, is in that videotape that's embedded in your program that you were sent with Mr. Sullivan's picture on it. If you click on that, there are 3 profiles in there. But as I said, we figured out that we would take a look at, in terms of what we looked at, a $20,000 per hire over a 5-year period of time. So here's your annual revenues generated. This is the total revenues generated, okay? And you take that over a 5-year period and it grows like that. And you say, okay, the cost of the incentive for each of those positions is that. And then you take, as I mentioned, we just took the growth and exits for each of those categories. And that's the net return over a 5-year period of time after the investment, okay? If you do just the direct calculation, both with the taxes and with revenues generated by the employer, there is still a sizable investment return. And so we would argue, as we think about this question of priorities and whether or not we have resources, we would argue that there is a revenue stream available to fund something, okay? And we're happy, as I said earlier, to talk about that, and that's where we're hoping that we'll go. So let me turn this over now to Jim Buheim.
We spent a fair amount of time talking about some of the problems and issues that we're facing in the state, and a little bit about the actions that we can take to address those. I think this afternoon is much more about those actions, and that's where I'm going to focus my initial questions for this panel.
The biggest issues that we hear about when we travel the state, and some of the things we're trying to do to address those, not surprisingly, it is the workforce shortage, the quantity of workers, and then, as our chief economist likes to say, when you have a numbers problem, you're going to have a skills gap issue. If you have a football team with 7 people, not everyone's going to have quarterback skills, and so we're trying to be as strategic as possible about, we kind of use the metaphor of casting a wider net. The areas that are being the most successful at attracting and retaining top talent, prioritize collaboration between the public sector and the private sector. The ones that do it well consistently collaborate with their local EDC, with their workforce development board, with their tech college. As far as out-of-state recruitment, I think we'd love to get more folks in Wisconsin. We have a lot to offer, and I think we've partnered fairly well with some of our sister agencies, WEDC and Department of Veterans Affairs here in Wisconsin. We also have strategized with agencies like tourism that a lot of folks that will eventually move to Wisconsin have their first experience here as a tourist. And then our IT infrastructure at DWD, as far as our Job Center of Wisconsin. We're really active on social media, all those things that are relatively simple but I think effective. We look across the country for leadership on some of these issues. I think from what I've seen, we continue to be a leader in programs like apprenticeship. I think we are in the front half of the pack on reentry. I've seen other parts of the country probably do more to address some of the housing issues. Some areas have different industry clusters that have new or perhaps innovative apprenticeship programs or apprenticeship-like programs. So I think a lot of the things that we're working on, we feel like we're a leader. We continue to look for best practices outside the state. And as we travel throughout Wisconsin, there are things that we'll work with our partners on as far as barriers. We hear a lot about personal barriers to entering the workforce, things like criminal background. We hear about child care issues, and then some more systemic issues like transportation, housing. And so I think we're really grateful to have strong partners in our fellow agencies, as well as local EDCs and local business leaders that are willing to address some of these barriers.
You have to have the pipeline being filled, or you're going to have more trouble later. And of course, that's where we are now, is that we don't have enough people, and we have a growing economy here. We have a lot of great things going on. We have been able to grow our population a little bit, but we still have that shortage of workers. I think we have a special situation here in Eau Claire. We have a collaborative spirit. People work together. They really try hard to pull their own weight and to come together to find solutions. People feel good about being here. They're creating new opportunities. They're trying things. They're opening businesses. So those are some of the positive things that have been happening. We've gotten a lot of national and statewide publicity about Eau Claire being a great place to live. So we've actually had employers tell us they've had an increase in outside applications because people hear about Eau Claire, or they come to a music festival here and they say, hey, I would like to live there. Everybody has to change, right? So we have to change education, government has to change, employers themselves have to change. And now it's a seller's market if you're a worker. So we all have to think differently. We have to look at the ways we interact with our employees. We have to look at the flexibility that we offer. We have to understand what it is the employee is looking for when we bring them on board. They also have to understand what the job is. There's still a lot of things that can be done collectively, whether it's through government, whether it's through education and business working together, that can move the needle and make it much better, however. So one of the bigger challenges is a small business, one that are having trouble finding enough people. They're willing to change, but they have so many balls in the air to run a business that they need help. Perhaps the question is, how can you be a little bit more nimble? How can we move forward? How can we, recognizing the need, especially in the public sector, of the responsibilities you have to be transparent and open and give everyone a chance, what can we do to get the solutions implemented a little bit more quickly? We have to come up with ideas. We have to take our part of it. We have to improve our best practices. In some cases, it is going to be a legislative remedy, and we have to be willing to talk to our legislators, talk to government departments, talk to chancellors and presidents of colleges about what can be done, and so that our voice is heard.
Workforce development is still just as relevant today as it was in the recession 10 years ago. It just looks a little bit different. The collaboration that we've seen between the private sector, workforce boards, and educational institutions, these solutions are really not done in a silo. There seems to be more of an approach to the rising tide lifts all boats approach. So I am seeing more willingness to share best practices from employers out to other, whether it be HR resource groups or at chamber events. People are talking and really trying to support each other because this is a regional, statewide, national issue. From the employer side, the incumbent worker training and in-house training piece to promote retention has been a big increase for us. We've seen more companies, whether it be in-house training programs to partnering with workforce boards and training providers to deliver custom solutions. We're seeing more employers investing in their incumbent workforce to get them upskilled so they can move their entry-level workforce into higher paying jobs and open up opportunities for entry-level positions. The trend has been we're seeing less people completing those programs because they can leave and find a well-paying job in this historically low unemployment. And so our shift then becomes, how do we get those job seekers engaged to complete those credentials while maintaining their job? We know lifelong learning is really critical for those future jobs. AI, automation, and technology are really going to change the world of work. And so education and training is still just as vital. And so what we are happy to see is that the educational institutions have really responded by creating these shorter term programs, stackable credentials, and flexible programs in partnership with employers. So that way these job seekers and employees can get that training that they need and still maintain a job to pay for life's expenses. When I'm talking to employers, this is an issue that we see every day on the front lines. So this issue, we read about it in the paper, the labor shortage is here, but when you're experiencing it every day with employers that want to stay competitive, that want to grow their business here in Wisconsin, we have an issue that we need to help them address. And so talent attraction and retention continues to be the most requested service that employers need help with. And so that I don't think can be underscored enough. This issue is not specific to Wisconsin. We're not alone in this. And so when I talk to my peers across Wisconsin and I hear from other workforce boards across the country, these issues are common. And so there's a lot of research being done in new innovative ways of looking at education and trainings for how can we meet the needs of our current workforce into the future.
And I start by asking each of you, you talked about many of the things that you're doing in the videos here. Of all those things that you're doing, what have produced or what do you think is most likely to produce the best results in terms of matching workers and jobs and worker retention?
And thanks for having us here today. This is a great group, good morning session. It's interesting, we have a lot of different programs that I think are really effective, and you saw it in the video, but the visual that I do think about is casting a wider net and a stronger net to get more folks in the workforce. But as far as the most effective programs for us, we are really bullish on programs like apprenticeship that allow for folks to earn, in most cases, a living wage while learning a really valuable, highly paid skill set. And so we are very proud to have implemented the first apprenticeship program in the country back in 1911. And in so many cases, we've done it first, we've done it best. And it's a big program for us as far as both addressing quantity of jobs as well as the quality. I'm so glad that so much discussion this morning was on wages and the value proposition. As we've traveled the state and talked to companies that are having success with attracting and retaining people, they've prioritized quality pay and benefits. So we think that apprenticeship's a great way to address both quantity and quality. And then as far as casting that wider net, I think someone else mentioned in the previous panel, but Wisconsin releases about 9,000 people from corrections every year, and so I don't think it's any surprise that we are seeing a ton of momentum behind really meaningful reentry programming. Whether it's, we've delivered 2 new job centers in correctional facilities in the last year. We're going to deliver 4 in 2020. We've had mobile learning labs go to job centers for a multitude of reasons. Obviously, one of the greatest antidotes to recidivism is a quality living wage job so folks can be self-sustaining, and so we believe in that. And it's also just the right thing to do. I think we're grateful to have this unique inflection point where there's a really high sense of urgency to find every worker in the country or in the state possible. But these are things we should be doing no matter what the unemployment rate is, so we're excited to be putting this into process.
I think I would echo what Secretary Frostman said. The area perhaps I've seen the most progress in is the things we can do to create awareness and introduce the young people already growing up in Wisconsin to careers that are here. And I think I've, having raised 3 children in our area, living there 17 years, them going to both high school and higher education, and the progress from when they're a little bit older and what's available to young people now. So the academic and career planning that's happening in the K-12 schools, the youth apprenticeship program in high schools, I think that could be expanded even further. We at the Eau Claire Chamber just became the consortium for our county, and there are additional career clusters that could be expanded there. And then our higher education, institutions of higher education, UW, in our area, the 3 UW schools in west central Wisconsin and the technical colleges, Chippewa Valley Technical College, have done a lot of things to create internships. Missy Hughes just talked about the new internship initiative to get more college students involved in internships in our communities so that they can stay here. I know specifically University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire, a quarter of the students come from Minnesota. And so if we're going to import people to Wisconsin, one way would be to get them integrated into our community and to love our community, marry somebody there if we can, but if they get a job there and like working with an employer instead of getting an internship in Chicago or Minneapolis or somewhere, we have a better chance of hanging on to them. And I do want to mention, you said one thing, but we have worked really hard in Eau Claire. What can we do to attract people to our community? And Secretary Hughes mentioned that WEDC has the talent initiative programs. We got together with our local culture and entertainment publication and produced a video and website called Think Eau Claire that really plays on the research WEDC did and takes the things we have in our community and uses that for our employers to be able to attract people and talent to Eau Claire. So that's another thing that we think is valuable.
This is the danger in going last. I would agree with both of the Secretary and Scott's comments. We've seen a lot of great talent pipeline work. I think the Waukesha County Business Alliance, they've been mentioned earlier in the program. They do a lot of great work in the K-12 system and most recently branching out into parents. We know it starts in the home, and so getting children educated sooner rather than later and getting teachers involved in teacher externships, we're really starting to see more momentum around those efforts. And so I think that'll really play out as they get older and start picking where they're going to continue their education. One thing that I touched on a little bit in the video that I want to expand upon is incumbent worker training. So we know that employers are really investing in their workforce that they have, and so oftentimes we're looking at a workforce that might be lower skilled as retirees are leaving with a lot of institutional knowledge, and so employers are investing in how can we train our incumbent workforce into new positions and open up opportunities for less educated or less skilled individuals to come into the front lines. And so we're seeing some great movement within companies, and the payoff has been that employers are able to retain those employees because they're really investing in the front lines. We know that's important to millennials and Gen Z, and quite frankly, it's really important to, I think, all workers to be invested in by their employer and to feel like it's a place that they can really call their home away from home.
If I can, I'm going to follow right up on that training piece, because I think it was you in the video who specifically talked about AI and innovation, automation. Do you have examples of organizations who have done, more specific training in those areas to try to get, all employees ready for the kind of digital refresh that's happening, right now, as well as those jobs that may be affected by AI and automation?
Yeah, I think there's a number of manufacturers that come to mind here in our 3-county region. A lot of times we've seen some reactive approaches rather than proactive, but that pendulum is starting to switch into more a proactive mode. Data analytics, AI, and automation is really driving training needs inside employers. We know it goes beyond manufacturing, but that's who I have the most experience working with. We're seeing that training being done mostly through partnering with institutions like Carroll University and our technical college system. Employers often can't do this alone or in-house, so we're having to bring in third-party experts. And so we're lucky that we have HERA in this region with this huge concentration of educational institutions to help, and that's where employers are seeing that great benefit.
Thank you. And then you heard from, each of the 3 panelists here about things that we're doing, in terms of matching workers and jobs, many involving what I'd call in-state efforts. Are there examples of efforts that you're seeing right now or that you're engaged in right now that are helping to attract that out-of-state worker and bring them into the state of Wisconsin?
Well, I know it's interesting having Secretary Hughes here this morning, something we talk about a lot. In my background, I was in economic development, and we focused a lot on workforce development, specifically on worker attraction and retention. This is not, as Jim mentioned and Dennis discussed, this is not really a new issue, but it's definitely pointed at this point in time. But when we asked folks, what is it that actually attracts people to a place and what keeps them there, I heard it this morning from Secretary Hughes, but it's the quality of life, economic infrastructure like broadband, like the quality of schools, like the water quality, like roads. And so, we've prioritized those type of investments across the administration, and we're hopeful that when folks look at relocating, as Secretary Hughes mentioned, that value proposition of why would you leave Michigan, Minnesota, Illinois, Iowa. We really want to provide that strong delta between our neighboring states and Wisconsin.
I realize I jumped ahead and you already answered this question, but I will mention that we were hearing from our employers that they could sell their culture at their place of business and talk about why someone would want to work for them, but this issue that has come up of people don't just look at the job, they look at the place. And because we have a lot of good things happening in Eau Claire, but we have a lot of good things happening everywhere, they came to us and said, what can we do? How can we need something to be able to do this. And so we listened to them, got some feedback, talked to WADC to find out how they were marketing the state, and basically created a local effort called thinkauclaire.com, which is really a Chippewa Valley centered effort to show what is life like there, what are the attributes that someone would be attracted to, and the attributes that we have. And we're even moving to the next stage is we're going to produce a follow-up to that to talk about why winter is so great in Wisconsin.
So certainly we have some large employers that have been able to attract students from other colleges out of the state and out of the area. But I think the challenge we have is we have a lot of small and medium-sized businesses in our 3 counties. And so when we look at solutions, I think it's really important that we look at how can we include all business sizes in these talent attraction efforts that go out of state. One thing that I am seeing, though, it's not necessarily out-of-state attraction, but attracting maybe a workforce that isn't participating. And so you might have a stay-at-home mom or a college student that can only work part-time. And so we're seeing employers really tailor their work schedules and work environments to attract those individuals to participate in the labor force. And so we're seeing some great traction around those efforts. And so that's one piece, but I think it's a piece that shouldn't be forgotten in the conversation.
And in your videos, I think each of you stressed the importance of collaboration. I mean, do you have additional thoughts or suggestions on what we could do to get even more energy out of public-private collaboration?
Yeah, as we have traveled the state, the areas that have done well in this have had really strong collaborations, and private employers are doing things as simple as donating equipment or donating time, but that collaborative piece between what I mentioned on the video, the workforce boards, the economic development corporations, K-12, tech college systems, it's so very important to having successful outcomes. We've seen that kind of across the state in urban areas, rural areas, where that collaboration is there. It's been really, really successful.
I think the question about the common good came up earlier, and that also extends to all of us. In our institutions or organizations, we have to look at maybe checking our egos at the door, or something that's a little bit more difficult. I think some of the government leaders in Madison, I think the partisanship is still of great concern. It's not very well viewed from our part of the state. But we've had a lot of success in Eau Claire with having people get together and do things between education, government, and the private sector. Invite you to come up and see our Performing Arts Center that opened a year ago, and the difficult but worthwhile effort to put some of that together. I think there's some issues we need to move on to that were mentioned earlier: housing, transportation, childcare, doing more to overcome barriers for people. So those are some things that we haven't made as much progress in, and we need to work on those.
I think all of the examples that we've talked about that have been successes in our region have come from collaborative efforts that have involved the private sector, public sector, workforce boards, education. Oftentimes, we're having someone from the public sector or a nonprofit be the facilitator and bringing private sector to the table. And the thing that I've seen change a lot in the last couple of years is the private sector being willing to engage and share, I won't say trade secrets, but share really, inside baseball, how are they attracting their employees, hoping that their colleagues and other companies can benefit from that. And so I think the more employers are getting together around specific sectors or occupations, the public sector and nonprofits can really help them facilitate how do we create scalable approaches that we can benefit all small and medium-sized companies with.